Thank you very much, Atya, and thank you so very much, Sugat. I think what a fantastic opportunity your organization, um, Ratnasagar, has given to all of us to be on the same platform. And what better than having all colleagues together? I think that itself is a huge biradari feeling. Yeah. And thank you so much for giving us that feeling and making us come together, because I always believe that when there is a lot of uncertainty, we should constantly over communicate. And that's so important. And I think right now what is going on is earlier it used to be death by PowerPoint. Now it's death by webinar. So all of us are into this huge scene. But I think it's great. And I think we get to see each other and talk to each other. And I think it's fantastic. So I'd like to start off by saying that, you know, it's so important that we are going to be having some marvelous principles. So many great colleagues of mine who are going to be speaking on very relevant topics that are going to be a great challenge for all of us. In fact, the first global crisis of this century has disrupted everything. And I see it in a lot of gatherings that, you know, I never used to understand the word disruption when people use it as a fashion all the time. But I actually have been able to deconstruct disruption in sort of principle and letter when I look at the way things have moved on. So this disruption has really impacted learning. And so how do we view, how do we review, how do we reshape and implement this disruption in this post-pandemic situation? Because it's filled with a future of uncertainties. And is the learning that we need, it'll be completely different from the education that we're going to receive when we get back to our schools. And the accelerating force of digitalization and the fact that the future will be even more disruptive, ensuring us that we have to have new challenges and new opportunities. In fact, whether it is parents or whether it's teachers or students, we will have to look at learning in so many different ways. We'll have to look at it socio-emotionally. We'll have to look at it through infrastructure. We'll have to look at it in the physical sense. We'll have to look at it as a pedagogical issue. And we'll have to look at it also as a teacher training issue. So there's so much that we have to look at. And I don't think it's going to be an easy job for principals and for all of us together. And this pandemic has really torn back the curtain. You know, it has on the idea that what we know, what we are doing, and I mean, we don't really know what we're doing. We're all shooting in the dark. And it's given us a status quo. And none of us can really say, I know the answers. I don't even think people in authority know the answers. This may sound politically incorrect, but actually nobody knows anything. We just sort of, you know, lustering along with whatever we know. It's an evolving kind of a process. What we do know is that 1.2 billion children have been kept out of schools for a pretty long time, from March onwards. And many of them have transitioned from offline to online. And the ICT revolution that we used to keep boasting about for the last 10 years, 15 years, has really accelerated, and teachers have really come up to, a certain level. They've been troopers. And this has brought about a sort of a focused teaching at times. And a lot of teachers say that they're having full attendances in their classrooms. The teaching is got quite focused. The children are involved and interested and so on. But everywhere the reiteration is that this online teaching cannot take the place of brick and mortar schools. It cannot take the place of face-to-face learning. And yet the future is giving us another kind of an answer. So, and what is happening is that a sizable chunk of learners belonging to the EWS may or may not be having that kind of learning. So can you imagine that whether all of us who are sitting here and listening to us, we're going to grapple at 3 levels with learners. They're going to be the privileged lost who have had the complete access to learning. There's going to be a middle level who had mediocre sort of learning systems through phones. And there's going to be a huge lot that never had learning at all. And how are we going to look at those pedagogies? How are we going to work through that? So what we need to do is the holistic development of these learners and create these robust programs of physical and emotional development. And because this has caused a very serious issue, a serious problem. And because it's unnatural to be locked up like this 24/7 in a home, and especially with adolescents, because, you know, their hormones are raging, they're bubbling, they've not had normal lives with their peer, they've not had their programs, and they've not had their friendships. I mean, they've just not been able to go out. And this is very unnatural, whether it's for parents or whether it's for the youngsters. So I think one of the most important aspects of even now, and now and when we get back to school is how are we going to embed this socio-emotional learning within the curriculum, within the syllabus? How are we going to look at this? Because I think if we don't look at it, there's going to be an existential crisis, not only in our country, but across the world, because the world is grappling with the same issue. And then we'll have children who will have behavioral issues, and we'll have children who will do themselves harm. Now, for all this, who better than a very dear friend and an extremely respected colleague of mine, Dr. Ruchi Seth, who is currently looking after Locust Valley and has been across a spectrum of schools in the country and has been very deeply involved with education at so many levels. And I think she's the apt person to tell us the way forward in how do we look at the emotional compass of children who are going to come into our schools. So, Ruchi, Dr. Ruchi Seth, I leave the stage to her. Ruchi, over to you, dear.
Thank you, Amita. I couldn't agree with you more when you said that we need to over communicate, because there is so much utter confusion, right from us to the children to parents to policy makers. We really don't know what is the way forward, but we can, after discussing with each other, get some clarity little by little perhaps, so that we can make a roadmap for the future. And if we are looking at the schools, you talked about the adolescent children. Adolescent students, I'd like to think of them as quarantines when I pronounce that with a double E and not an I. And that itself is axiomatic in a sense. If you look at them, it is deeply unnatural for them to be locked up in their homes. And it is natural for them, because they are wired in that way, that they do not like to spend time with family, and they resent it absolutely. So, and this is the age group which is going to be most affected with the quarantine. The younger children, they still want just love and affection and the family members to be around. But the older ones who are in the senior school, they are the ones who are going to lament about lost milestones. And these lost milestones, I've heard children say, so what's going to happen about class 11, class 10 who's passed out? Students are saying, what about class 11? This was our children. This was the best time of our lives. And we're going to miss it all. When we come back, half the year would have gone by. So I do feel very bad about them. And if we are looking at the curriculum, um, uh, I think we already did sense somehow that in schools also the content was kind of being sent to the side. And what was coming up was more of life skills, value education. A lot more emphasis was given on these things. And because of this huge, uh, because of this pandemic and the way things have just changed overnight, it's kind of jettisoned us into online teaching, but it's also made us think very clearly about what are we doing with teaching? What should be our real content? Is it what is available on the internet at a click of a button? And the world is a library in that sense. You can access any information anytime. But what you can't access is how to develop in children those very important socio-emotional skills that you spoke about, Amita. And socio-emotional learning, developing all those life skills that we've been talking about, but we haven't had time in school to really concentrate upon. That's what is going to become center stage now. Skills of self-awareness, it's there in the books, whether it's the mental health manual that you look at, whether it's the life skills curriculum that you look at, it's very much there in the book, but we didn't perhaps give it as much importance. There are the 21st century skills of decision making, critical thinking, problem solving. It's not going to be, assessment is going to change in a very big way. It's not going to be content driven and content based. It's going to be more about self-learning, children taking responsibility of their own learning, preparing them for a future where they are able to face life's challenges with equanimity, empathy, living together in a world whereas, although I do think that it's going to be more localization than globalization. We are going to, the world is again going to go back to the old pattern because travels are going to get affected. Even then, living and working in groups, whether it's online or in real time, in real places, it's going to require a lot of empathy and understanding of different cultures, diversity in dealing with each other. These are the skills, how to manage your emotions, how to manage your relationships. This is going to redefine the success of a student because anytime, anywhere, learning through technology is going to be present for all of us. All of us, of course, those who can afford it. And I think that that's where governments and institutions also need to, and we'll talk about perhaps later, about the investment in these areas when you spoke about infrastructure. So these are what we are looking at, whether it is self-awareness or social management skills, relationship skills, decision-making skills. These are what are going to come in the center stage of our curriculum rather than the rote learning and reading up text and answering questions from the book. That's going to actually not be as important as it once was. And of course, building competencies in these areas is very important. And I think parents and teachers both have a changing role to play because a lot of the values come from home. Right now, what we see in schools is that if anything goes wrong, the parents blame the school. So they have to understand that the value setting has to be done at home. The reinforcement happens in the school. And similarly, the two most important other skills that I would talk about is adaptability. You know, we find in schools, even when we change the section of a child, the parents get upset and they want the child to go in a particular section where the children have their friends, etc. And we keep telling the parents that that's not going to help your child. They need to learn to adapt to each other. And I think that again brings into focus the need for adaptability, the need for resilience, building resilience. I think this generation Z and the alpha generation, they are the ones who are most mollycoddle and spoiled. They are the generation that parents have comfortable lifestyles and they want to indulge in their children. It's time that they understood that resilience comes with a bit of self-restraint and a delay of gratification of their needs. And I know I'm discussing this keeping in mind the metropolitan population of students, but there are those children who are living in not so privileged areas and not such privileged lives. So we have to think of how can education become accessible to all of them. So governments would need to invest in those children as far as technology is concerned. But even then, the focus should be on how to make yourself competent enough to be able to be successful in the future. And the future does not hold the jobs necessarily that are present today. There's going to be a tectonic shift in the kind of jobs that are available. And I think a lot of freelancing work will come into center stage also, because all these high paid, high profile jobs, it's going to even out a little. And when we come to freelancing and changing jobs, as has been the trend of late, children need to adapt their own competencies. But I think technology, the thing about technology is that it's going to give us a level playing field. And anybody who accesses information and is able to hone those socio-economic skills, a combination of this knowledge, skills, values, these three put together, that's what we need in equal measure, not weighted in favor of knowledge and information. So if we can do that and prepare our children for the world of the future, where change is the only constant, where this is not going to be the last pandemic or last tectonic shift in the environment. We don't know what's going to happen next. We have the locusts coming in, there's going to be food problems, there's going to be, the ability to help humanity, help each other. The empathetic factor has to become very high now in children. So there's a lot that needs to now, we need to rethink about these things and we need to replan. I'm wondering, when children come back to school, we've been told that 30% of the, sorry, 50% of the children are allowed to come in, and that too of senior school. And we had the same situation just before school closed, when the CBSE exams were going on. And while we tell the children to shift their chairs even further apart, according to the then standard of 4 feet apart, we said, you have more space, move your chairs back a little more. But what happened when the bell rang? They all came out, they all hugged each other after the exam, they all went into the washroom to chat with each other. How do you impose these restrictions? Amita, as you said,
I
social
think,
distancing
Ruchi,
is a deeply
yeah,
unnatural phenomenon.
absolutely. I think, Ruchi, I mean, if I may say,
Yeah.
firstly, I think you have articulated everyone's worries so beautifully. And I think that you are absolutely bang on when you say that, we have to look at the whole idea of adaptability and so on. And perhaps we should have something like, mindful Mondays and wellness Wednesdays and
Yes,
family
yes.
Fridays and together Tuesdays and scaffolding Sundays and supporting Saturdays. I mean, I just cooked this up suddenly. But I think we should have
Okay.
something like this. But I think thank you so much, because currently we know that there's a lot of issue about wellness. And we know that it's going to be a domino effect, and there's a huge issue about mental health that's happening. So thank you very much for those deliberations, and I'm really going to look forward to your responses to the questions that you've come. And having said that, learning now has become extremely sort of linear in the way we're looking at learning. And the landscape has shifted a lot from that kind of learning into a more elastic learning. And how do we look at the integration of classroom, online teaching, and how do we look at the generic term of blended or hybrid learning? What is it that we have to do for our teachers? How are we going to really empower this group that has been so strong and stood by us through these difficult times? And I think there could be no one better than Ms. Anjali Agarwal, who is the CEO and principal of St. Mark's School, and has been an educator, very fine educator, progressive educator for several decades. So Anjali, I leave it now to you to give us the whole idea of how you're going to be looking at this kind of area and creating these communities of practice.
Thank you, Amita ji, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to be part of this particular panel discussing.
Is Anjali there?
Yes, yeah, can you hear me all? Can everyone hear me? Yes.
Yes, please. Very clearly. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. I was given the topic to talk about syllabus and pedagogy. And I started thinking, what can I possibly tell other illustrious principals who are already so many years in this particular field about covering the syllabus, about what the curriculum should be, and how the way forward is going to be. So then I just started thinking. I said, after all, we talk a lot about curriculum mapping, curriculum planning, and then we frame our syllabus on the basis of our curriculum mapping, and then decide what we are going to teach in which particular class, other than class 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th, which is usually, dictated to us by the powers that be, whether it be CBSE or any of the other boards. So we are actually able to make our own syllabus up to class 8th, of course, with guidelines from NCERT, which we have all been following till date. And when we think about it, our curriculum mapping is basically based on what we expect the children to appear for in the 10th and 12th board examinations. Recently, there was a meeting with the CBSE officials, and when we as principals asked many very relevant questions, we also got replies that we are still thinking about it. the syllabus is going to be drastically reduced this year, and you will be informed about it by the end of June. And we are well aware that there are many sections of, there are many schools which have not been able to have online classes, including many of the government schools. So we will have to take all that into consideration while making the syllabi. So I started thinking, it's all very well for us, most of our schools which are in metropolitan cities, which have all the facilities to have good online teaching. But yes, there are so many students and so many schools who have been left out. And already 2 months have gone past of this academic session. So let's realize that this particular academic session is going to be very much different from every other academic session till date. The only other comparison I can possibly make, in a few principals will remember that there were certain stirs during the time of the Mandal Commission, and many schools at that time promoted all the children to the next class because there was no possibility of holding examinations, year-end examinations in that particular year. So this year is going to be very much different. And we as principals will have to work, each one in our own way, work out how we are to make the syllabus appropriate for this class, for the classes of this year. We have to redraw our academic calendar. The first thing we have to do, if we are going to be thinking in terms of huge annual days, first and foremost, that's out of the question. Big cultural programs and such things, these things will have to naturally not be held this year. Examinations also, the number of days we used to take to hold our midterm examinations, our pre-board examinations, our final examinations, and of course all the periodic examinations we used to have. We would have to do a real rethink about that. Can we afford to waste, yes, I'm saying the word waste, to waste so many days? Because right now, the time of the children is also very, very precious. We can't afford to waste their time. We have to dispense with all frills. Conceptual clarity has to be emphasized. We're not to bother about things which are really actually frills, but we have to see that our children understand the concepts well. An interdisciplinary method, we all know about it. What's taught in social science, what's taught in science, we needn't repeat it in both the classes, in both the subjects. There'll be lots of overlapping. Each principal will have to sit down and up to class 8, make an effort to reduce what is not required, concentrate on what is required. And yes, sometimes in blindly following books and blindly following what the NCERT suggests, we stuff too much in one particular class. Let us decide if it's not important to teach a particular concept in grade 6. If it can be taught in grade 7, let's go ahead and do that. We have to, of course, embrace technology, which I think nearly every school has done wholeheartedly, and our teachers are doing a magnificent job. I think all the teachers, the entire education fraternity has not allowed this year, this pandemic, to get us down.
Thank you very much, Anjali. I think that was extremely well articulated. And I think what is so important is that you sort of brought out the features of how we're going to look at learning, how we're going to look at hybrid learning, synchronous, asynchronous learning, blended learning, flipped learning. But at the end of it, I think you also, touch the human chord by talking about the fact that how we have to sort of, knit all this together and sit together as a fraternity and see what is it we can do for the child. So that was very, very extremely well articulated. And I think a lot of our fears, a lot of our thoughts have been laid to rest by your deliberations. Thank you for that. I think when we're talking about finances now, and we're saying that, this pandemic has truly affected the teaching community in schools in many ways. And the expenditure that has occurred to the point of generating funds through fees, which have become contentious issues across the nation. So how are we going to reset? How are we going to rewire the finances in our schools, and this is a very big issue, in the middle of a recession, and bring in this minimalistic approach where we can keep our head above water as private schools. I think this is something we really need to think about. And I think we have a wonderful person in our midst, Mr. Anirudh Gupta, who is the CEO of a very large group of schools, which is several decades old, TCM group of schools. And I think he would be the best person to give us his overview on how he's going to look at how we as schools should look at our finances. Because we know that there are going to be the hard rains going to fall, and with the whole economic depression coming in and unemployment, I mean, lots of people may or may not want to pay us the fees, the annual charges and the development fees. How are we going to run schools? Because ultimately we have to run them. So I leave it now, and I now ask Mr. Dr. Anirudh Gupta to please take the floor. Dr. Gupta.
Thank you, Dr. Watil. Good afternoon, all of you. I think in these present times of pandemic, this is one of the most burning and a crucial issue, how to manage finances in our schools. As we all know that post-lockdown, parents are a little shy of providing fee to the schools, and every state government has come up with their own notifications, their own district magistrates, district administration, they have come with their own formulas. So, I mean, we need to, tread very cautiously so that, I mean, we do not go overboard also, we do not bypass any norms also, as well as we are able to manage finances very effectively. So, I mean, as every school is, different in terms of quantum, in terms of number of students, what is the fee structure, what kind of a working capital is available, what kind of liquidity you have at your hand. So, I mean, there is no magic formula or no standard formula or to work out on the finances. Every school has to devise their own ways and means to look into that. However, having said that, I will like to talk on this issue in two different aspects. One in terms of our expenses, how to regulate them, and one in terms of, your capital inflow and your fee management. So when I talk about, expenditure, I think we all need to, regulate it. We have to restructure it, relook at it. We have to, work on a zero-based budgeting. All the departments in your schools, be it be security, transport, housekeeping, health, IT, your academic programs, I think we'll have to, review all the current expenditure. Whatever academic programs we had planned for this year, whatever expansion plans were there, whatever renovation plans were there. So we have to relook at the entire budgeting. Here I will like to say, since, though we are not clear when and how the schools will reopen, but I am sure all of you are working on the plans and the standard operating procedures to reopen the schools. So 4 departments, like your security department, your housekeeping department, your health department, and your IT and technology department. I will suggest not to do any cost cutting in these departments, because in these 4 departments, your expenditure is actually going to increase. I mean, how to screen the students, the teachers, the visitors coming to the school, how to sanitize them, how to increase the number of hand washing stations, how to chip in, more fogging machines, more housekeeping machines, how to disinfect the entire building. Your requirement for sanitizer is going to increase exponentially. So there'll be a lot of arrangements and facilities and equipment you'll have to bring into the school in order to ensure that the schools do not become the secondary point of infection as soon as they resume operations. So likewise, Dr. Wattle was saying that, we might have to switch over to flip model or a blended model or a hybrid model. So you will require more internet bandwidth, you will require more laptops, more workstations. So in terms of your IT requirement is also going to increase. Likewise, you will have to chip in more doctors, more nurses. Like supposing a child is coming to the school and you use the thermal temperature to check the temperature, and you find the temperature is more than the normal. So you have to immediately, rescue the child to the isolation chamber. So you might have to chip in more medical staff in your school. So other than these 4 areas, most of other departments where you had some estate department, some some renovations plans, some beautifications plans. So I think they can be put on hold or they can be relooked into. Another thing is that, in terms of human resource, when you conduct the manpower audit of your school, because what we see, the most of the expenses that go into the salaries and other establishment costs. So while we recommend not to, lay off anybody or do anything of that sort as far as possible, but you can, look into the cross utilization of your staff. If I'm saying you require more nurses or more people in the security department, more people to monitor and supervise the housekeeping operations, so you can cross utilize the staff. Staff from the co-scholastic areas like your sports, your performing arts, your creative arts. So that kind of allied staff members into those services, they can be cross utilized. They need to be trained and put into other areas. So you need to marshal your resources rather than increasing on your requirement of the human resource. So this is another aspect, and we need to monitor direct cost escalations also. That which where the cost is really escalating, how to negotiate, how to save money. Another thing is schools can do, like if you have some liquidity problem, if you have some capital deficit to even pay your salaries, you can look into some fundraising events. Lot of online events, like we heard of crowdfunding, lot of events can be organized. I'm sure there are a lot of people, who have surplus, they'll be more than keen to help you. You can even secure some soft loans. You can negotiate with the vendors, like whatever sundry creditors you have. You can even negotiate with the banks, on you can have the installments, or you can negotiate on the interest aspects of the loans. All these things will require very very mature handling of the finances. You need to take some unsavory decisions. You need to show a lot of leadership and flexibility. So talking about the expenditure part, every school will have to look into their own internal arrangements, as I said, based on your working capital, based on your reserves, based on the quantum of the students, based on the type of clientele you are catering to. So there is no one size fits all. So every school will have to review their own internal arrangements. One thing I want to say here is to all the school managements, to the principals, these are difficult times. These are challenging times. Let's first think about survival. Let's survive and then we can thrive. All right. So let's understand, the public sentiment also, which is, entirely against the schools these days. Fine, because of certain segment of schools, who at times go overboard. So, we draw a flag for the entire fraternity. So talking about the, fee aspect, number two, like as I said that every state, maybe UP, Bihar, Maharashtra, Punjab, Haryana, every state has, since education is in a concurrent list and it is a state subject, so every state, they have issued their own notifications, directions, so you cannot bypass that. So I will strongly recommend that whatever, the court of law says, or whatever state government or the district administration says, if you tell you to only collect the tuition fee, then please collect the tuition fee.
Mr. Gupta, Mr. Gupta, can you hear me? Can you hear me, Mr. Gupta?
Yes.
Mr. Gupta, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Mr. Gupta, I think that you have made some very, very important points, Mr. Gupta, because your experience in running schools is shining across in this so very clearly. And I think the most important points that we must look at is that minimalism has to be our approach. At the same time, we have to look at the way we are, we have to look after our staff and ensure that at least they're paid. And I think a lot of money is going to go into hygiene, in conservancy materials, in technology and in communication, and even in buying licenses. So I think that itself is there. And thank you so much for that. And I think a lot of us have understood a lot of interesting things which have come from you. So with that, I think now that the next person I would like to come on in the panel would be Ms. Soumya Gulati, who's the director of the Bluebell School. And her focus has been on teacher training, and she wanted to speak on that area. And the truth is that the current education system was not designed to fulfill the needs of our children. So the COVID has shined a very glaring spotlight on these inequalities. So I think in the Zoom meetings, we have clearly understood that what we already know will not work, and it cannot be transferred into the new environment. So how are we going to empower our teachers? What are the necessary skill sets that you feel that the teachers should be given? And how are we going to bring in this whole understanding of personalized learning, hybrid learning, and how are we going to deal with these take-home devices? So I leave it now to you, Mrs. Soumya Gulati, who is going to now give us a sort of a brief deliberation on how she's looking forward towards teacher training. Soumya?
Yeah, thank you, Amitava. Thank you so much for your kind words, and good evening, everybody. Well, thinking of teachers today, I think they are our unsung heroes in today's time, for they've really embraced change very, very well. Change will definitely not come if we wait for some other people or some other time. We are the ones we have been waiting for. We are the ones who have to prod ahead to go ahead and seek for the change which we want to see. And I think our educators, our teaching fraternity, the teaching fraternity, in fact, across the globe, are our unsung heroes. They have risen to the occasion and brought in the necessary changes. They were thrown literally into a lurch with classes just being called off, online learning started, and they have tried to bring in the very necessary changes, modifications, and accommodations to the learning systems which are required in today's challenging times. But I would definitely not want to call today's times also challenging for the teachers especially, and for all of us for that matter. I would like to call it opportunity times. I think there is now a pandemic of opportunities for teachers to acquire, try, and test new skills, and also to collaborate with parents on a wider spectrum of thought, practice, and action. Well, to begin with, when we talk of learning in the COVID-19 situation and the post-COVID-19 situation, one thing is very clear, as has been expressed by my fellow panelists also, that online learning, we call it blended learning, hybrid learning, is definitely here to stay. So we definitely want educators, we need educators who are tech-abled, but not just tech-abled, I would say even tech-comfortable and competent enough to handle all kinds of virtual platforms to impart learning, be it Teams, Zoom, Google Meets, there's a Zoho app which has come in, all kinds of programs, so as they are able to ensure a smooth transaction of the curriculum. But herein lies a differential point, because unlike ready-made material which is available, or all the mobile apps which we have available, click of a button, I think when a school educator steps in, it is not about teaching curriculum, it is about teaching children. It is about learning with the children, learning with the learners. And this is where reskilling of our educators is much needed. Well, definitely, as I mentioned earlier, they need to be trained on technology. That is, like, there is no argument about it. However, I also feel that the teachers need to be further trained upon redesigning, modifying, accommodating their learn pedagogical practices, redesigning the lesson plans to suit the online virtual mode platform. They need to be trained so that the entire flow of the classroom transaction, which is the pulse of the school, is suitable, and very, very visible elements are there for the virtual mode. We cannot, one fear which happens, when I was thinking of the online platform way back in March, I said one fear is we can just slip into, mundane rote learning. Well, this is where a teacher needs to be reskilled. We are not to slip into that. We need to ensure that the elements of inquiry, creativity, curiosity are still embedded executed and visible in the lesson plan design, because only then will they be visible in our classroom transaction. Because our tasks, our dealings with the children should never to be one way, which is a fear when you are using PPTs, when you're using a virtual platform. Let us engage them in an interactive manner, continue to do so, design our tasks, design the parameters of all our engaging activities in such a manner that they suit the online mode and are yet interactive in nature. For only then, I think, we'll be able to achieve the desired learning outcomes. And as educators, as a fraternity of educators, I think we are all aware and no denial to the fact of the importance of a learning outcome. For if the desired learning outcome is not achieved by a child, well, I would say learning has not really happened. It is only with the desired learning outcome that a child will at the very end be able to read, understand, analyze, apply, create, and apply his entire learning process to a real life situation. So even on the online platform, when we are communicating with the child, in fact, teachers now need to over communicate. If I can borrow those words from Dr. Amita, they need to over communicate even with your students while taking the class. Difficult to manage and connect with those small windows appearing on the class, on a board, when we are so used to a live classroom situation. But yes, that is where reskilling is needed. Reskilling, which can come in through even workshops related to socio-emotional and motivational workshops, because teachers are also passing through trying times, and to ensure their efficacy, obviously we need to address those, for only then will they be able to address the unique emotional baggage of each and every child. And when we are doing
thank you so very much. I'm so sorry. I think you've been there's some very interesting points that have come up, and the way that you have brought in a sort of a common mutuality, and how you've looked at hybrid learning, how you've looked at personalized learning, and the way that you've sort of talked about the opportunity crisis engagement and moved it out from the field of challenge. I think it is fantastic. Thank you so much for your very pertinent deliberations. And now thank you for that, Soumya. And now I would like to introduce a friend and a colleague, Richa Agnihotri, principal of the Sanskriti School. She has served across various boards and has worked very closely, both of us have worked very closely with each other in what we have designed modules for teacher training, for affiliation, for teacher development. And it'd be very interesting, Richa, to see how you could throw some light on this whole opportunity that we have today on how we can actually look at 21st century skilling, which was actually only words in the, earlier in the past, which is words we kept banding around. So how do we transform this pedagogy? And how do we integrate this fantastic pedagogy and make it experiential and make it self-oriented and yet keep our head above water? And how can we look at this maybe from nursery to grade 8? Because it's very clear that we can look at our own syllabus, we can look at our own curriculum and sort of rework, rewrite it. So Richa, I now leave the platform to you. Richa, please.
Thank you so much, Amita. Thank you, Ratna Sagar, and thank you, Atya, for giving me this opportunity to speak with you on something I feel so passionately about. So thank you very much for this. And, there are always advantages and disadvantages of being the last one. So I think the disadvantages that whatever had to be said has already been said, and there's very little left to say. And the advantage is also that there's very little left to say, but allow me to give my 2 bit. So Amita, I might take more than 6 minutes, and here I start my. So what I'm going to talk to you about is really 2 things: the business of schools, or should we say the business of education, and the students are the learners, actually, because now both teachers and students are the learners. So remote learning, and I'm not deliberately calling it online learning because that implies live classes. So remote learning was always there. There was a Google Classroom, which was being used by many schools. There was Udemy, Coursera, online training for teachers, but we never really took it to the level at which we've taken it now. The present pandemic has brought it to this level and has brought the classroom to the screen And so remotes, so the teachers are using a variety of tools to make it meaningful, to make it effective. And suddenly this techno challenge generation has started to speak the language of the youth and deliver the information to them in that language. But my question is, what have we really reached that? Are we really doing that, what we intended to? And more importantly, will we continue to? So bringing the classroom to your home and delivering the same lecture is not really embracing technology. And I don't really think it's a paradigm shift. It's just shifting the room. So that might not so much even do good so much for children, because children are going to miss out on social engagements. There will be reduced time spent on developing other skills. And as Ruchi pointed out very correctly, that it's also going to get the children to start feeling alienated. So in order to really bring about a pedagogical shift and the pedagogy that we talk about, we need to relook and review the business of education. We need to redefine protocols and systems, and we have to blend learning, and not just online and offline, but way beyond that. And I like to start by sharing a few examples. So I'm a physicist, so I'll start with simulations. I think we've, as a teacher, we've used simulations for doing experiments that we couldn't do. You couldn't bring a radioactive element into the classroom, but these can be explored further and should be explored further, because virtual reality is a reality now and needs to be looked at. वो कहते हैं कि ज्ञान बांटने से बढ़ता है, और I think educators across the world have embraced this. So suddenly applications are available for free, which have made the job easier both for the educator and more effective for the child. There are numerous resources, archive videos, museums, art galleries, which are open to all and anyone who wishes to be a part of them. So now is the time to take this learning beyond the classroom. And I agree with you, Ruchi, when you said it's going to become localized, but I think education is becoming globalized. So while physical localized, education becomes globalized. And when Google came in, as teachers, we realized that we don't have the answers, but Google does, and children can find another place to find the answers. I think the big realization which teachers have to come up with now is that I am not the most important resource in this room. And more important is that I have to now go and find those resources or curate the best resources so that I can facilitate the process of teaching and learning. And now I come to the business of the learner, because learner needs are varied, and differentiating the process has to accommodate all those needs. So while we were in a classroom, we were able to fulfill them to some extent, but it becomes a much greater challenge now. Differentiating both in terms of implementation on the learning process, as well as assessing the outcomes. So again, like I said, the tools were always there, differentiating tools, but the business of using them to actually reach out to every learner and ensuring that they are able to access ability appropriate learning material. I think that's the new step. And in some ways, I think it will give us the opportunity to review some age-old teaching practices, which maybe were not inclusive. Again, it is a huge task for the educator, because the educator has to identify and explore tools, applications, resources that allow every student to access the content in the best possible way. And I'm going to say best possible way, and I'm not going to say equally, because no two people will access the content similarly. So the other big thing which has to really undergo a sea change in terms of pedagogy is going to be the assessment after that, because that has to change completely. I've always been a big propagator of open book assessments, and I think this is the right time to bring them into practice. My argument has always been that in real life, I'm not expected to remember formulas or the times tables. I can always refer to books. I can always refer to other resources. And so why should my education just be about memorizing these concepts and then applying them? Shouldn't a large part of the education now is about using resources effectively? Tell the children all that is there and how best they can use it. I mean, why should I bother to calculate, and a calculator and an Excel can do it for me accurately and in less time? So I think the highly evolved Indian brain should be used for more higher order thinking and not sort of for 27 times 42. So the assessment will have to be learner-based, individualized, and self-based. It will have to be contextual, because I'm going back to what Amita and Amita also spoke about, and so did Anjali, the fact that the context is not the same, and we can sit on our chairs in our offices, in metros, but we do not really know the context of a school in a village in India and the back of beyond. So therefore, our assessment and our learning will have to become more and more contextual. It will have to become more skill-based and not stay content-based. So we will have to relook at developing 21st century skills of collaborating, critical thinking. And we need to now think in terms of project-based learning. We've always talked about it. There are lots of people who are doing it, but we need to look at it at a larger scenario from 9 to 12 as well. Because the learners have to, on their own, learn to identify content, explore it, access appropriate resources, think for themselves, investigate, process data, evaluate. Because aren't these the skills that are required in an adult work life? So why not start right away? I think more importantly, and everyone's talked about it, it should be about developing independent individuals who take responsibility for their own learning and are being prepared for life outside an education institution. I think we underestimate the human mind, and we will see a sea change in student development if we allow personal choices and we allow contextual decisions. But I come back to my initial reservation. What if it is all a waste? What if we go back to where we were? And I'm going to throw some questions at you. So how can we as educators ensure, and how can we promise to ourselves that we will use this opportunity to revolutionize education, to actually bring about the paradigm shift that will bring the education system to an enviable position? We have the talent, and now we have an opportunity. What we need is a strong will, and what we need is action. And here I think we need to look at the government and educational bodies to bring about this shift to reality by relooking and reviewing present structures. I think a lot is already being done in terms of curriculum appearing as learning outcomes, in terms of competency-based and skill-based learning, in terms of integration of art. I think these are excellent progressive changes, and they're much needed. But there will have to be a huge shift in many other things, including curriculum, syllabus, assessment. We're also we're looking at them to look at curriculum in a way that's, like I said, contextual to everyone. None of us show us what's going to happen in the next 2-3 months or the next year. But we can say one thing for sure, that educators across the world have shown that we are a resilient community. We're adaptive to change, and we're ready to embrace new ways. Our learning curve, I think, has been the fastest, and I do hope that it stays. Thank you very much. I look forward.
Richa, that was absolutely brilliant, and thank you very much for those absolutely wonderful thoughts, which sort of, I think, merge into the kind of responses that we've been finding from all our other panelists, and the whole idea. And I think this is resonating with me, that the whole idea that there should be an emphasis on enabling students to construct knowledge, and through testimony, and teacher feedback, and the teacher actually really being the guide on the side. Because actually what we've done with online and offline tests, except we've embedded videos and we put in what is it called, PowerPoints, but otherwise at the end of the day we're still teaching the way we teach. So I think this is a great opportunity for us to really rework at the way we think learning is. Now, having said that, there are a couple of questions which have come up, and I've sort of got them here. And I was wondering whether, if, I'll just throw it to a couple of you, and we can say the questions that they're going on, and you could listen to them carefully. That is there a need to open school at all? Somebody asks. I mean, is it not endangering us? That's one. The other is that, screen time has got too much for smaller children, and their eyes. And is there any alternative ideas coming from us? And there's another one, strangely, is because I haven't found this, unless there's a connectivity problem, is that how does one cope with poor online attendance of classes? There's another one which talks about EWS reimbursements. Please forget about it. They're not coming. I'm just responding to that question. The other one is about, how do we sort of, is the NCERT going to guide us as to deduction of the syllabus, or does every school do it independently? And then how do we standardize it? Do we really need to standardize it? I mean, I'm just putting it across to panelists, because then you can just pick up from wherever I'm saying. And there's another young lady who talks about the fact that she's running a school till grade 8, and she has these desks and the 4 kids sit on one desk. So there are guidelines which are in any case going to come out from the NCERT. So I think we'll have to follow them in letter and spirit. And there are a couple of more questions. We talk about if syllabus reduction is going to take place this year, and she's sort of what shall I say, compared it to the moratorium of banks, and says unless it is done even next year, we'll just be paying the price for just doing it in bits and parts. And then again, perhaps Ruchi could take this as, social distancing. What she's trying to say is the social distancing is actually diametrically opposite to what schooling is about. So how do you deal with that? And what are the kind of guidelines that will come out? Are they the same kind of content transaction? And examinations online, they'll have huge issues about access. Today also I read that DU students were saying that we can't give the exams online. We have issues of access. So by and large, these are the questions. Would anybody like to take one or two? Can I start with you, Ruchi? Would you like to take any one of those questions? Ruchi?
Sure. What about if I talk about, I saw somebody talking about how do you, hello,
yeah.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, clearly, please. Clearly.
Okay.
Clearly.
So,
I can hear
all
you
right.
clearly.
So you talked about social distancing, and I saw a question on how do you train teachers for socio-emotional development of children? Did I get that right? So,
well, in a sense, she talks more about social distancing.
Okay, I'm going to talk about social distancing now. So the question is that it's very difficult.
Ruchi, Ritu, if I may just, Ruchi, may I just, I'm so sorry to disturb you. If you could just make these questions short, because lots of questions have come up, right?
Okay. I'll be very brief. I'll be very brief.
Please.
So just two things. If you see the spectrum of children, the age group of 3.5-year-olds to the 18-year-olds almost that we have in school. And I'm going to limit myself to schools. So the little ones will join much later, because it's very difficult to make them understand what social distancing is all about. They want a hug from the teacher, they want a hug from their parents.
Correct.
And it's difficult to make them feel comforted. The little tragedies of childhood that happen in the classroom, they will fight with a neighboring child on a little pencil or something. And then how do you comfort the child without touching or coming close to the child? The other side is the young people, the teenagers. For them, as I said, there is unbridled resentment to this phenomena of social distancing. They do not like being, like losing their autonomy. Their friends are the world to them. And how do you tell them that this is not to happen? I mean, getting close to each other is not to happen. So you have to sit and reason with them. That's the only thing that can make it work. And sometimes you have to relax the rules. So you have to see whether social distancing is happening at home also, outside, after school hours also. If it's not happening and we are going to impose it only during the time of school hours, then we are going to be the monsters, so to say. So the teacher's role becomes even more challenging in that case. So the important thing is to talk, to make them party to the rules that you're going to create, and talk to them in such a way that the dialogue that happens leads to an outcome which is good for everybody, for the children as well as for the school. Because we also know that if this happens in school and there's contact tracing, the schools can be held responsible. That's a sword hanging over our heads. Much as we'd like to take the responsibility of
I think,
of keeping
Ruchi,
our children safe.
Sorry, Ruchi.
Yeah.
I think, Ruchi,
yes.
I think we've got this. Thank you very much. And I think that's an absolutely pertinent thing you've talked about, that we can't, we have the kids, we can't have them coming because of the issues. I just like to ask Mr. Gupta a question, if you're still here. This whole business about EWS reimbursements, would you like to take that question, please? If Mr. Gupta is there. Are you there?
Yes, ma'am. Just a second. Ma'am, he's put himself on mute. I'll have to unmute him.
Yeah. Could you please unmute him? Unmute him?
I can't see him.
So would would anybody else?
I'm sorry, he's not in the participants as of now. Maybe
that's okay. Would Soumya like to take that question? Soumya, about the EWS reimbursement and about is there need to open school?
Well, ma'am.
Soumya, would you like to take that?
Yeah, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Well, ma'am, regarding EWS reimbursement, as you yourself voiced, we really don't know what the government taking would be on it, and it's anybody's guess as much as it is mine. And about schools reopening, very well said by Dr. Ruchi. And if we look at a bigger challenges also, ma'am, because even if children were to join school, the teacher's face is covered with a mask, the child's face is covered with a mask, and it is your people skills of the teacher really has to be worked upon. Teachers have to be trained, their people skills have to be enhanced, where you're communicating with the child, emoting for the child through eye contact, through voice modulation, and also ensure it's only social distancing and not social isolation happening for the kids, because that's going to be further traumatic, when they're all wanting to hug each other and we are like literally policing them. So that absolutely people skills really need to be worked upon.
Thank you very much. Richa, would you like to take the one about the whole idea of online testing? And I mean, I don't know where people have got this from, that whether are we going to do online assessments, online testing, and the whole issue about being guided by the NCERT for bringing down the syllabus, I mean, for sort of deleting it or for diminishing it. Would you like to take both questions,
so
online assessments? And
I can give it a shot, Amita. I can give it a shot. So as far as I know, NCERT and CBSE are both looking at reducing the syllabus. From what I've heard, they're looking at 30% reduction. But from where and how and not too sure. But I think what's important is for us as teachers and educators, and we are the best people, we're the experts at this, to look at what is really, really relevant. So, if I don't teach 2 poems, but I teach them communication and I teach them how to express themselves, I think that's more important. Similarly, if, maybe I don't teach them about a particular concept, but I feel that something else is far more relevant. So, before the NCERT or the CBSE come to us, we can relook at what we are teaching and decide what we can, do later, what can be thought about, or maybe shown a video, but not really assessed and, taught in that greater deal. So I think as educators, we know ourselves what we can change. But yes, I agree with the point that's made that, what if I decide not to teach something and then the child struggles with it for the next 4 years? Yes, that is an issue. And I think we'll have to figure out, ways and ways to deal with it. I think, your guess is as good as mine. But I genuinely believe that we need to start looking at our curriculum and see what can, what's more important really. In terms of testing and assessment, 2 things. I mean, I look at it in 2 ways. One is that we need to change our system of assessment completely. We need to make it a way that, they can't cheat, but you'll be able to tell. And more importantly, you'll be able to get a better idea where they are. Therefore, project-based learning is the best, where they have their own context, their own idea, and they do their own process and work on it. You said one of the skills that we want to teach children, and there's a value in that, of teaching children to learn accountable for themselves. I mean, at the end of the day, they submit a piece of work. Mommy and daddy are not
Sure.
going to be there, and the math teacher is not going to be there to say important. So when I ask my children, when I'm doing an assessment for them, I trust them, and I hope that they my trust, and that's how we'll have to build a community.
Thank you for that, Richa. I think that was very well put. I'd like to ask Anjali. Anjali, there's another question that's come up about children and about younger children, and the problem that they're having with this whole online phenomena, and can there be any alternatives to this online, and also issues about cyber security. Anjali, would you like to take that?
Anjali? Sure, yes, I would. Yes. Regarding the question, and this question has often come to me also through parents and teachers, that so much of screen time affects the little ones. And ma'am, please reduce the classes, because we feel too much of screen time is bad for the children's eyes and it's not good for them. So anyway, there were certain suggestions given to help them, that after every 20 minutes, ask your child to get up, move around, and maybe look at a distant object and things like that. All the necessary things were told to them. But then I realized something very, very unexpected. These very same children whose parents complained about excessive screen time were playing on their video games, were taking their parents' phones and playing other various games. That time it wasn't screen time. It was only when it was when the teacher was teaching was it considered screen time. Okay, that's just a little point which I wanted to make. But younger children, yes, for the younger children, for them to feel a closeness with the teacher through the medium of online teaching, it becomes a little difficult. For this, the teacher has to make extra special efforts. She has to reduce her teaching content by 50% and have 50% only for interaction, to make the child feel important, to make the child feel that he is that both the teacher and the child are managing to form a rapport. So this is what I feel as far as little children are concerned. And as far as the bigger children are concerned, the bigger students are concerned, they're much more at home with technology than the teachers are. So that's what I have to say about the system and how the little ones are to be dealt with and how the senior students. I hope that.
Thank you very much for that. Is somebody, I would just like to ask, there's a question that, well, not really a question, because some very, very wonderful thoughts are coming up about experiential learning, about blended learning, hybrid learning, about the whole gambit of changing the way that we think about learning and so on. And I think there's somebody who has also answered this. There was this worry about, you know, what do we do if children are not attending classes? And I think this gentleman has answered it. I think it's Shiv Kumar, who's answered it by saying that, you know, I personally go and check up why children are not coming in. And I think lots of schools are doing that. And that shows the care and concern that, you know, that schools have for their children. And I think that works for parents because it matters a lot. So having said that, what I'm going to now do is, I'm going to very briefly ask our panelists, because basically the questions are more statements and very profound. And I hope that Ratna Sagar is recording this, because and somebody is taking down some of these statements, because they can always be put into little blurbs, and that's very important. And it should be put into blurbs, their statements, because, you know, once we shut this phone, it's going to go off. So I think what I would like now the panelists to do is very briefly, one line. I know this is terrible. This sounds like awful anchors on NDTV, but this one line, if you could just tell us, is how are you envisioning, you know, today and tomorrow? So it could we start off with, maybe we could start off with Soumya. Soumya, would you like to just briefly a line?
Ma'am,
2 lines.
I think this is a wonderful time also to collaborate with parents. Let us accept and believe in the fact that parents are the co-educators now. Let us just accept it. And when I call them co-educators, I mean collaborating with them in situations like, okay, low attendance, the parent can run, ensuring the parent can also ensure that the child is, you know, sitting for the classes at home as fresh as he or she would come to school to, you know, it's not a case where the child practically jumped off the bed and sat in front of the computer. So, and, you know, like the parents being involved and, you know, making them a participatory.
So thank you very much. Soumya, Soumya, may I disturb you? Soumya, may I disturb you? I'm so sorry. That was 4.5 lines. That was brilliant. Thank you very much. That was like connecting with parents, and I agree entirely with you. And we must, I think that you're bang on. Parent-school partnerships is very important. Thank you for those wonderful thoughts. I would now like to ask Anjali briefly, 4.5 lines, and Soumya did 4.5, maybe 4.5 lines. Anjali.
Okay. One thing we have learned is that our teachers rise to the occasion. Our teachers are wonderful. They can do marvels in every situation, whether it's in the classroom, in face-to-face with a child, or whether it is through the online or the blended learning or sending messages, our teachers are great. And I feel that the success of education is basically on the shoulders of teachers, and 3 cheers for all the teachers.
They are also Corona warriors. Teachers
fabulous, fabulous. Please don't call them warriors. I find it's like a warlike situation. I hate this word warriors. I'm a peacenik, Atya. Right. So that is fantastic, Anjali. I think here we looked at Soumya's concept of parent connectivity. Here you're talking about teachers and how fabulous they've been, and no doubt. I briefly ask Richa now, some thoughts, last thoughts, Richa.
Thanks, Amita. I actually just want to congratulate the children because they have really risen to the occasion. And, you know, the fact that they're attending 5 hours of online classes, submitting homework, ensuring that they're there on time, reaching out, I think it's been wonderful. So I'm extremely, extremely proud of my children. And I hope that as teachers, we don't fail them. So whatever progress we've made, we let it continue. Thank you.
That is great. I mean, it's fantastic. The way you knit, you 3 guys, I think there's some kind of a conspiracy against me. You've knitted these things so beautifully. Parent, teacher, student. You brought the whole thing together so beautifully. And I think everybody has been troopers in that. And now Ruchi, some last thoughts, please.
Okay, I'm going to be very brief because I know you want me to be brief. So 3 things. First is...
I'm sorry, I'm terrible.
No. So the first thing is that we spoke about learning communities. There's 3-pronged learning community: teachers, student, parents. Very important. We've been saying it all along, but I think the message will go loud and clear now to parents. Teachers have risen to the occasion, students have. And the parents need to know this is here to stay, so they better get involved in it in a positive sort of a way. Second is, when we all talk to each other, communicate with each other, the over communication that you spoke about, I think we'll go from the present confusion, we'll go to clarity. We'll know how much syllabus to cut down, what is blended or vis-a-vis whatever kind of learning technologies we want to adopt or pedagogies we want to adopt. So there will be more and more clarity as time goes by. And the third thing is, there is going to be EQ was the concept of EQ was introduced in 1990, and while we've been talking a lot about it and somewhat integrated it, I think a lot more emphasis will be given. The time is now, so it's EQ versus IQ.
Right, Ruchi.
Those are the 3 points.
No, absolutely. Thank you
Not
so
even
much for those absolutely brilliant thoughts. Thank you so much, Ruchi. I just want to know whether we have found Dr. Gupta, or has he disappeared into cyberspace? I mean, is he there? I gather he's not, right? So,
he's not.
Have you found him? Has he been located? This is like the Scarlet Pimpernel. They seek him here, they seek him there. Right. So, now I just want to say that what a fantastic evening this has been. And we had a marvelous group of our colleagues who came to be with us, and all the panelists. What great deliberations. You've been given such fancy compliments that I've seen on the chat, and you all have been fantastic in the way you have spoken your thoughts, your ideas, and it's been an eye-opener. It's been an eye-opener for a variety of standard operating procedures. And you've talked about all sorts of issues, from local bifurcation, curriculum, to maintaining hygiene, to mapping school complexes, to focus on hybrid schooling, and perhaps at another level, artificial intelligences may start playing a bigger role than expected. I think the whole idea of functioning will now be us running a marathon rather than a sprint. And I think now all of us, students, parents, children, have really become marathoners because it's a long haul. So thank you very much, all of you on the panel. Love you, and great talks. And thank you very much, Atya and Ratna Sagar, for having given us this wonderful platform to chat on. Good night and God bless you. And thank you very much all.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Amita, for being
Thank you, Richa. Thank you, Soumya.
Thank you.
Thank you for being a great moderator,
Thank you so much.
Amita.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Atya. Thank you, Ratna Sagar.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ratna Sagar.
Thank you, Atya.
We have recorded this and we'll be sharing it.
Great.
And we are going to do 6 6 such deliberations across India. So
Wonderful.
Wonderful, wonderful.
And on behalf of Ratnasagar, I would like to thank all the panelists, Ruchi Seth, Anjali ji, Anirudh Gupta. He's not a part of the session, I think, anymore.
And
Mrs. Kulati, Mrs. Agnihotri. It was wonderful to hear all your thoughts. I think, as I keep telling everyone around in the company, that this is like an earthquake. And when a major earthquake, when all the buildings have been shattered and you have to rebuild the city. So when we rebuild it, it will come out to be much better, very different, and much more, with many more new ideas. So when we rebuild our lives, when we rebuild the way we do the transactions of teaching and learning, there will be many new ideas which earlier were not possible but are now going to be possible. So I think there are many unanswered questions which we do figure out along the way, and with the help of such bright thoughts over here and enlightened minds, I'm sure we'll be able to come to conclusions as to how and what the way forward will be. Thank you all. Thank you. I really thank all the participants who've joined us today and taken time out to be a part of this session as well. Thank you.
That was an earth-shattering comparison, by the way.
Thank you on behalf of Ratnasagar.
Thank you very much.
We'll meet soon again. Physically, inshallah. Tatkastu.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, Richa. Bye, Anjali. Bye, Soumya. Bye.